And what do I miss? It's being in an operational environment with people who are focused on the same thing. I didn't have to worry about whether or not my co-pilot was ready to go. I knew he was ready to go. I didn't have to worry about somebody saying, you know, I just don't want to do that today. I don't think we should do that. No complaining, no objections. Everyone was focused on a mission. It was a vehicle in which 6 guys came together and put their lives in each other's hands, and the price of failure was death. So what I miss is the camaraderie. I miss the flying for a while. But I miss more than that now. I miss the relationships that I had with the crew and with the SAC system. Being on a team, everybody's focused in the same direction. Williams Air Force Base, Willie for short. I graduated, I went through the ceremony. Mom and Grandma Osborn helped pin my wings on my uniform. Well, on the way down to Williams, and actually at some point in that time, I realized that I was now in the first phase of a military career. It was what I set out to do, and I was eager to get started. All the students in my class went through a preliminary phase of flight instruction where those that came unprepared would graduate from that program with the equivalency of a private pilot's license. And I already had my license, so it was kind of a repeat of that. That was a fun program. Then we got into the actual flying phase at Willie, which was the T-37, the Tweed. That was an incredible time for me because I was rapidly becoming a jet jockey. That was about midway through the first year, the year at Willie. I completed the T-37s, I soloed in the jet. That was probably the most memorable experience. When we got down to just ready to take the active runway, my instructor said, okay, stop here, and he opened the canopy and got out and went to the little observation shack, which was right at the end of the runway, where they always had an experienced pilot sitting there to help out students if they needed it. He said, you're cleared solo, no questions. Yes, sir. So he got out, I bid him goodbye and closed the canopy and locked it, got clearance, pulled on the runway and took off. You know, when it really hit me was when I looked across the cockpit where my instructor usually sat, and it was an empty seat. And way over there was Williams Air Force Base. And I'm going through about 12,000 feet climbing out, and I thought, this is great. And that's when we graduated from the T-37, which was basic jet trainer, to the T-38 Talon, which was advanced jet training, and that was a supersonic airplane. The training, the ground school, the academics, and the flying training was all very carefully sequenced so that as you progressed, you would be challenged more and more and more in your flying skills. Eventually getting into the T-38 phase, which was formation flying at that time. And when I went through pilot training, they were teaching four-ship formation, which is, flying the Diamond or Entrail or whatever, but it's 4 aircraft flying together. While I was at Williams going through pilot training, I attended that program with some very close friends from Oregon State. And we were classmates there on campus, and we were also classmates, Air Force classmates at Williams. Ron Kenyon, who is a great friend, had an impact in my life. Ron is a true friend who gave me a lot of support, and there was a lot of camaraderie and closeness in that relationship. And then Bill Kincaid was a great friend. We socialized a lot at Oregon State, and Bill, after graduating from UPT, got assignment to fighters and was killed in Vietnam shortly after he graduated from UPT. We had at the time a program called the POW MIA bracelets, and I wear this bracelet for William Kincaid for all those flyers that were missing or killed in action. There was a bracelet until their final demise, I guess, was established. You were either listed as a KIA or MIA, and for a long time he was MIA. So the deal for wearing the bracelets for all your colleagues was to let it be known that those people were still in our hearts. They were still to be accounted for, and not to be written off as a casualty of war. Bill was listed as MIA because they never found the crash site and never found him. But later, his status was listed as killed in action, so that kind of closed that out. The Vietnam conflict was really increasing in crescendo, and SAC, Strategic Air Command, was playing a greater role in the conflict. Starting in the mid-'60s, they began to send B-52s to Southeast Asia to augment the fighter forces and to support the interdiction of the North Vietnamese and the enemy. You graduated, and based upon your class standing, you had a choice of what aircraft you would like to end up in after undergraduate pilot training. So when it came time for my class to graduate, the Air Force would provide a list of assignments, available assignments. Somewhere during my pilot training program, I realized that I just wasn't there for the gee whiz part of flying airplanes and being able to go to the stag bar and drink beer and ring a bell and say I was a jet jockey. And there was much more to it than that. It was a mission, it was a commitment that I had in myself. I began to rationalize that if I was going into combat, I wanted to make the biggest impression I could. And the way to do that was to drop the biggest bomb from the biggest airplane on the biggest target. Then there were a lot of B-52 assignments that came on the list because, as I mentioned, the SAC's role in the conflict in Southeast Asia was gathering momentum. That was my airplane of choice, was a B-52. So right from the get-go, that was number one on my list. I felt at the time that I could serve my country best in that role. Military service and serving a cause greater than myself. And that was the defense of this country and democracy. And it's not a matinee punchline, it's the truth. It's what I felt. I always felt that military service was both a privilege and an obligation to this country, to my nation. At the end of before you graduate from pilot training, you're going to get an assignment. The Air Force is going to say, Osborn, when you graduate from pilot training, you're going to XYZ. Your assignment is going to be to B-52 combat crew training at Castle Air Force Base in Atwater, California. Carswell Air Force Base, I think, which was where nuclear weapons school was. That was a prerequisite to getting into the CCTS, was the bomber crew members had to go through nuclear weapons school down there. And that was about a 2-week program where that's when I was exposed to the biggest bomb. And that was where we had classes on nuclear weapons. We learned about fusing and firing sequences, how the bomb worked. It's very complicated. We learned delivery tactics. We learned about safe escape, blast effects, all of those features about nuclear weapons that no one really knew much about until you were exposed to that. So that was an eye-opener to me. And the impact really didn't hit me until my first alert tour when I was in a fully armed B-52 and saw those weapons inside the bomb bay. My first duty was to get familiar with the operations at Fairchild. So I went through some pretty concentrated training, and of course Fairchild was a SAC base. They weren't in the training business; they were in the alert business, the nuclear role. So I had to certify the mission that Fairchild had, and that was they maintained a certain percentage of their bomber aircraft on hard alert, which was a fully loaded B-52 in a secluded area, sequestered area called a Christmas tree, which was what they called the layout, but it was kind of a herringbone parking area with a center taxiway, and the nuclear-loaded bombers were placed with ready access to that center taxiway, which led to the runway. Each airplane had a target package. Each airplane had a mission, a sortie to fly with targets in the Soviet Union. So I had to learn those missions, and then I had to go before the wing commander as a brand newbie and certify to the wing commander. It was an interrogation program. I had to brief the wing staff on my role as a B-52 co-pilot and my alert mission. So now I'm 24 years old. I'm fully qualified as a pilot of a B-52. I'm going out for my first day on alert, which was a 7-day period where we were in restricted duty status. And the first order of business after we checked in was to pre-flight the airplane, because each alert bird needed to be pre-flighted every morning, which we would power up systems to make sure that they were operating properly, that the weapons were in the configuration they needed to be for the target package that we had. I remember going into the bomb bay and seeing, at that time on the B-52D model, 4 nuclear weapons in a quad pack, and they were 1.1 megaton yield. That's a million tons TNT equivalent yield. We had 4 targets, and there it was. And I realized that it was my responsibility to launch, get that bomb to the target, and satisfy my nation's resolve. That was the impression I got. It was overwhelming. I had an incredible degree of responsibility that I felt to do that. The nuclear bomber was in a restricted zone, and no one person alone could be in that zone. It was a 2-man policy, which meant that if you needed to go into the zone, you had to get another person to accompany you who knew enough about what you were going to do to be able to detect whether or not you were sabotaging the weapon system or a component of that or whatever. So it was 2 knowledgeable individuals would have to go in together. So when you crossed that line, you went into an area that was 1 step away from a target in the Soviet Union. When you're on alert, the notice to scramble is initiated by a klaxon that goes off. It's a horn. So the object then is to, as fast as you can, get from wherever you are to your airplane and get the engine started. So you never knew when the horn went off whether or not it was you were just moments away from taking off and flying to the Soviet Union, or it was an exercise. A Bravo exercise was basically you proceed to the airplane as fast as you can, button it up, your engines are running, you're ready to taxi. The only thing that keeps you from rolling is the wheel chocks under the front wheels, and the crew chief is standing by on your signal to pull the chocks, which means you're going to roll. That's called a Bravo. A COCO exercise in those days was a moving exercise. So knowing full well it's an exercise, not an actual message to launch, you would start the engines, ready to taxi, give the signal, the crew chief would pull the wheel chocks, and you would taxi the airplane out of your parking spot to the runway, cross the whole line of the runway, turn onto the runway, and advance the power, let the engine spool up, and then you would bring the throttles back, taxi all the way to the end of the runway and around and go back into the parking area. You were actually moving nuclear weapons with incredible destructive power in your airplane out to a runway and advancing the power. The only thing that would happen next is you would accelerate to takeoff speed and launch. I mean, you were that close. Whenever the horn went off, you didn't realize what was waiting for you when you got on the radios. So the crew, which was sequestered together, I mean, we stayed in the same, the two pilots had a room to themselves with two beds, and then the nav team, the electronic warfare officer, and the gunner, we were all together. So we would, if we were in the alert facility when the klaxon sounded and the airplane was parked close to the facility, we would just run. The object was to be as fast as you can to get the airplane safely airborne before an incoming warhead destroyed the base. That's basically was the intent. Sometimes your airplane would be a couple hundred yards away, so you would jump into a fast ride vehicle, and the gunner was the driver. That was predetermined. The gunner was always the driver. They would drive out to the aircraft, and you would park the truck off to the side, and then you would proceed to the airplane and get in as fast as you can and get the airplane engine started and get power on the airplane. We had 6 guys assigned to that crew, and whenever it came time for E-13 to go on alert, it was those 6 guys. Crew integrity was extremely important. That was one of the things that kind of set SAC aside from other commands and other missions, was the fact that crew integrity was extremely important. Here's the way I looked at it. I alone could not successfully complete a mission, but I alone could be the cause for mission failure. We learned to function depending upon each other, putting basically our lives in the target area in a combat world, in the abilities of the electronic warfare officer and the gunner. The pilots and the nav team were focused on getting the bomb on the target. Defense of the aircraft was left with those two, so we were depending upon them to do their job. So the longer you flew together, you became dependent upon one another. You became not 6, but 1. So the crew concept was extremely important, and I learned to depend on the crew. And fortunately, I always flew with an incredible crew. Every time we flew the airplane, we were practicing for the PSYOP mission, the war mission. Everything we did was practice for that. The training missions all had segments in them that would apply to the war mission. The takeoff, the navigation leg, low-level bombing, high-altitude missile launches, in-flight refueling, they were all part of the war mission. So the object was to be the best, 0 defects. You're not close to the target, you're on the target. Every morning before I go out to pre-flight my airplane, the crews assemble in the briefing room, and we get 2 briefings. We get a weather briefing, so we get a worldwide weather report, so we know what the weather is in our target area. Because remember, a B-52 will leave contrails if it's at high altitude. You don't want the enemy seeing your contrails, so we may have to change our altitudes based upon where contrails form. The second information we get is the location of threats that could impact Fairchild. So the most dangerous situation is to have Soviet ballistic missile submarines off the coast. And we know full well what their target package is. Depending upon where those subs are, and there were ways to determine that, we know based on the flight time of the missiles how long it's going to take from the time they're detected at launch until they impact Fairchild. The objective is to be airborne in less than 15 minutes from the time you hear the buzzer go off until your wheels are in the well. So if that time period is decreased because the threat is now closer to Fairchild, then the crew activities are restricted, and in some worst case situations, the crews are restricted to the aircraft. So during the time the threat is immediate, then the crew is pre-positioned in the aircraft. Let's say we have an alert. So I'm sitting on alert. I just right in the middle of having an omelet and about to drink a cup of coffee, and the klaxon goes off. So tables, dishes, everything fly out of the way. I run out to the airplane. We get into the aircraft. The two pilots and the electronic warfare officer scramble up the hatch. The nav team, the navs and the crew chief run around the airplane and pull the engine plugs out of the inlets, because the airplane has got those protected to keep debris from getting into the engines. They pull those out. The gunner makes sure the truck is out of the way. The crew chief helps the gunner climb into the tail, closes the hatch, pulls the stairs out of the way. Once the navs have finished with their exterior, then they come into the airplane, climb in the airplane. The two pilots know that it's an engine start, so right away we start the engines, and we use cartridges, which we start 2 engines with a cartridge. It's a quick start. We don't need any external sources at all. Fire the cartridges, and 2 engines wind up, and then that gives bleed air pressure that we route to the other engines, and we start those up. So now the engines are running. The alternators are generating AC power, DC power. The radios come on. They're tuned to the command post frequency, and over that radio we hear 4 alert force, 4 alert force, and then the message preamble. And the electronic warfare officer is copying that information down, and he will tell us, pilot, this is a go. It's always in your mind before you know what the message is, and that is, and picture this, okay, I'm a husband, a father, I am a disciple of my nation, I have a responsibility to execute the war plan, and I know full well that the reason I'm taking off is because Fairchild is a target. In your mind, you have to deal with the fact that there may not be a Fairchild left after you get airborne. And it's an incredible thought process to go through. I mean that your family, the whole area, I mean the devastation. Let me put it in perspective. Everybody's seen the mushroom cloud and the blast effects from the bomb, little boy that was detonated at Hiroshima. Okay, that was about a 14 kiloton weapon. The weapons that would strike, that would be launched from sea launch missiles or ICBMs, would most probably be in the megaton range. So you take the blast effect from the 14 kiloton bomb over Hiroshima and multiply that by millions. That's the blast effects that would occur around Fairchild. So you just know what's there. It gave a lot of individuals, probably, never to me, but a lot of individuals, about what they would do if they shut down and go home, or would you not participate? Would you say, I'm out of here and out the hatch? You'd probably be shot before you got out the gate, but that was the understanding. I mean, you sign up for that. I became intimately aware of the Second War, the conventional war in Southeast Asia, the Vietnam War, about the first part of January 1968. The B-52s in the nuclear world were painted a certain way, silver on top, white on the bottom, and a reflective capability for nuclear heat and light energy. And then all of a sudden, one day, a black and green B-52D appeared on the flight line, and we discovered that our airplanes were leaving Fairchild and being in silver and white and being replaced by B-52s that were painted black and green, and those were Southeast Asia color schemes. The black on the bottom to make them hard to see at night for searchlights, the green camouflage, obviously, for jungle camouflage. So from the nuclear side, there came a time when our alert force stood down, and all the weapons on our airplanes were downloaded and moved. At the same time, the base personnel, the crew force, were gearing up to deploy. So I started getting briefings about, Lieutenant Osborn, you better have a will. So you better go to the base legal office and make sure you have a will, a power of attorney. You better make sure all your affairs are in order, that your family is taken care of, that all your stateside responsibilities are covered, because you're not going to be in a position to be able to execute any of those. So that was kind of an ominous signal, because I had never really thought about that, having to prepare a will and do those kinds of things. But the first operation was to get into Guam, and we spent a third of our time. We were over there for 6 months, so 2 months was on Guam. And during that time, we had to refocus from the nuclear role to the conventional role. So we had to learn about Mark 82s and Mark 117s, where the 500 and 750 pound conventional bombs. The B-52D model had been configured to hold an enormous amount of tonnage of conventional bombs, 108 bombs. So we went through a program called SCAT, SAC Contingency Aircrew Training. And that's where we learned the conventional mission, what it was all about, what our operating parameters were. We learned about how the launch sequence occurs in a base that large with so many airplanes, over 100 B-52s, and your airplane's parked out in one little parking spot. You have to know exactly, based on a time and a route, how to taxi from that parking spot to your takeoff point. And there were 3 aircraft in a cell. SAC operated with a 3 aircraft cell configuration. So 3 B-52s would launch, 1 minute intervals. And then they would get airborne and join up, and they would attack the target as a 3-ship cell. So our briefings were sometimes only 3 crews, sometimes 6 if we had 2 cells, which would make a wave, depending upon the target information that we needed. ArcLight was the code name for B-52 operations in Southeast Asia. The tanker operation in Southeast Asia was called Young Tiger. And that was the code name for all tanker operations. And the KC-135s were in Southeast Asia before the B-52s were, because they were supporting all of the fighter activity that was going on before SAC got involved with heavy bombing. Then you'll hear Bullet Shot. Bullet Shot was the code name for the augmentation of the B-52Ds with the G-model B-52. There were 2 linebackers. That was a code name for an offensive operation. Linebacker 2 was probably the most notable one, and that was the raid on Hanoi in December of 1972. It was the 11-day war that started on the 18th of December and ended on the 29th of December. That was a pretty emotional time. I know from the family standpoint, there were a number of shoot-downs. We lost a number of aircraft and some great crew guys, some great heroes. That was probably the most heavily defended area at that time. They had an incredible number of surface-to-air missiles. There was MiG activity, Russian MiGs, a lot going on. And I remember during that time, I tried to make contact with family as much as I could. I was unable to be home when Karen was born. Karen had developed a problem, a nutritional problem, which was diagnosed as failure to thrive, because she had a pyloric stenosis, which was a defect in the valve that connects the stomach to the intestines. So every time she ate, she would throw it back up. I remember at Utapao that I got a call from the command post, and they said, you need to report to the command post for a landline connection to Fairchild Air Force Base, and I had no idea what that was all about. Talking to the doctor at Fairchild, who was telling me about my daughter and said, we're going to have to transfer her to Travis, the regional hospital. We suggest you come home as quickly as you can. And the doctor said, I think I can save your daughter. The attack profile was in order to deny surface-to-air missiles the ability to lock onto your aircraft, we flew a sawtooth maneuver, which the B-52s would come in and they would descend 500 feet and then climb 1,000 feet and then descend. So it was a sawtooth approach to change altitudes. And then maintaining your position in the cell, range and azimuth from the preceding aircraft, was a complicated maneuver, and it required, all 6 crew members were involved in that. I was a lead aircraft in a 3-ship cell, and the lead aircraft, our target was just north of the demilitarized zone, so we were in effect in North Vietnam. The MiG threat was there, and there were surface-to-air missiles batteries located in strategic spots around that airbase. So we were in a lethal area there for a short period of time. So I was a lead, and we were bombing synchronous. That is, very simply put, the radar navigator bombardier has a big radar scope, and he finds an offset, an aim point. It may be the top of a mountain, or it may be a building in an industrial complex. And he puts the crosshairs of the radar set on that target. The radar set knows where the actual target is in relation to that aiming point. So you aim at the aiming point, the bomb nav system directs the airplane to the real target. So that's called a synchronous bomb run. The other aircraft behind are doing what we call a station keeping maneuver. So they're flying in relation to me. So they have to be in the proper position when I release to start a stopwatch, and at the expiration of a certain number of seconds, that airplane is in the exact same spot that I was when I released and then they released. Same thing with the third aircraft. So those 2 aircraft are station keeping off lead. So here we are, we're about 120 seconds out from bomb release. We're trucking along. And downstairs, the navigator breaks crew discipline and blurts out over interphone, pilot, there's a fire down here. To confirm that, I look around and I can see smoke starting to boil up, coming up the stairwell there where the stairs are, and starting to infiltrate the bunk area behind. I can see smoke. The bombardier, who was a seasoned veteran, who said, "Stand by, pilot." Stood like that. So in other words, nobody say anything, I'm working it, which I knew he was. My co-pilot jumped the gun slightly and assumed that there was a fire in the aircraft. So he took the air conditioning master switch and inadvertently put the switch into RAM, which now dumps our cabin pressure. So the minute we're at 37,000 feet, the minute you dump cabin pressure, then the pressure equalizes and you get a tremendous fogging. All the moisture condenses and it turns to fog. So now we have smoke and fog, and I can barely see the co-pilot. The bombardier said, "I don't see any fire," meaning he didn't see any flames. So we proceeded on, made the release, did the post-target turn. We were headed back toward friendly territory, and the bombardier got out of the seat and went around, and what happened was there was a little blower motor that provided cooling air to some of the electrical components, and that had shorted out, and that was the source of the smoke. There was no fire. But the results of the crew actions created more problems than we needed, because in the D model, that was a tired old dog, and so to try to repressurize, go from 37,000 feet back to 8,000 feet cabin altitude, wasn't going to happen at that altitude in that airplane. So, and then to make matters worse, the pitot heat system failed, on the aircraft, and so I lost airspeed indicators because airspeed indicator is a function of ram air and the pedostatic system, and that's how it all works. And so I had no airspeed, no indicated airspeed to descend, and so I had a member of the cell was kind of like flying wing, and they'd given me airspeed indicators. When I got down below the freezing level, everything thawed out. I got my airspeed back. But, it's one of those things where you got to be ready for stuff like that. So it can be a little thing that mounts in intensity, and that turns into something bigger, and then it snowballs, and then you can easily lose sight of what you're there for, and that's to get the bomb on the target. We attempted to develop a tactics school here at Castle, and my wing commander said, "No, Osborn, I want you to go to Nellis Air Force Base," which was the location of Red Flag, which was where during the Vietnam conflict, Tactical Air Command practiced all of their fighter engagement maneuvers with MiGs, and it was an operating base where you practiced your tactics for two reasons. One, to help crews, B-52 crews, learn how to escape and evade fighters from both physical actions in the airplane and electronic actions with the electronic warfare officer. And secondly, to give the tactical guys targets to shoot at or try to shoot at. We developed or commissioned the industry to provide a simulator to us that would allow us to train an entire crew in a simulator, not just a static trainer where the pilots could sit over here and practice their checklist and throw the switches, and the bomb nav team could be over there doing that. They were all electronically, not physically, but electronically connected together. That was called a weapons system trainer. So I was selected to be the test pilot to go to Boeing in Wichita and fly their simulator and provide them with my expertise on how they could make their simulator more realistic. It was so critical, even down to the fact that when you're taxing the simulator, you need to feel the bumps in the concrete when you go over the slabs of concrete. So we had to simulate that. And that was a fairly lengthy program, and I enjoyed that tremendously, working with the engineers and software people down there at Boeing Wichita. And then the other job I had here at Castle, simultaneous with my instructing, was I was selected to be on the initial cadre of a new school built to train combat crew members to be instructors. And you fly and you develop flying time and expertise, and you come back to Castle to what we call the Central Flight Instructor Course, which was a program we developed. And then we teach those people how to be instructors to fly with less qualified people and send them back to their unit. We started with scratch, nothing, and we developed the curriculum, the academic curriculum, classroom curriculum. We developed the in-flight curriculum. One of the maneuvers that we did as a demonstration was called a Whifferdale maneuver, and that was an in-flight maneuver when we were connected to the tanker, refueling, and we were maneuvering the airplane. And it was a confidence maneuver to show that the flying formation, a B-52 and a KC-135 hooked together, 30 feet separation. You got almost 750,000 pounds of airplanes maneuvering, and it's okay to make a turn. So we would demonstrate to the students that flying a B-52 in formation with a tanker is not much different than flying the slot position if you're in the diamond formation. So Colonel O'Grady from Squadron Officer School called me on the phone one day, and he said, "I was talking to my neighbor, Colonel Grove, and he said, you need to come down here." And I said, "Sir," I said, I appreciate your vote of confidence, and I appreciate the recommendation from Colonel Grove, but I'm waiting on a confirmation of assignment to Anderson in the squadron there, and I've been working that with NPC. So I don't think I'm eligible for that to move to Maxwell. So mistake, big mistake. A week later, I got a call from personnel over in admin, and they say, "Colonel Osborn, we have orders here for you to Maxwell Air Force Base." As I came up on an assignment out of Maxwell, simultaneously with me searching for an assignment, the 93rd Bomb Wing here was searching for instructors with experience to come back to Castle because the nuclear mission was still ongoing. The crew force had been decimated by Southeast Asia. There were a lot of crew members that were fed up with military life, with service. The airlines were very attractive. Guys were getting out. We were losing experience in the crew force. So they called me and said, we would like for you to come back to Castle, which I thought, well, this is a signal. It was obvious that if I accepted that, then that was going back to where I had been, and so that was a signal to the Air Force that that was it. And we accepted that. Family, it was good for the family because it was no time for the family to be uprooted to move, because lives were being formed. It was not the time to be running around the Air Force again at that point in our lives to try to satisfy some idea that I had about career progression. There was a mindset at that time that the B-52 could be used as a tactical weapon system, and so discipline was an issue, and it really bothered me because having come from a very disciplined flight environment with my crews, to see the mindset with we can yank and bank the B-52 and treat it like an interdiction aircraft, looking for targets of opportunity and down in the dirt and bomb the eyes out of a lizard and all of that kind of stuff. That mindset was dangerous, and it was not what the airframe was designed for. So we had to ensure that students coming through were trained to understand the weapon system they were getting and the discipline required to fly it. And then it became time to seriously think about retiring. And what brought that to light was the end of the Vietnam conflict, also the collapse of the Soviet Union. So now our number one adversary, the USSR, was collapsing. Really was in the minds of the planners in the Pentagon and in the command structures. There was really no need for a strategic air command anymore. So the whole business of war was changing. So the decision was made to stand the command down and transfer the assets to Tactical Air Command, which was going to be changed to Air Combat Command. So Tactical Air Command was not eager to accept responsibility for B-52s, for crying out loud. They were a fighter operation. So there was some animosity. And also some of the leadership in Strategic Air Command toward the end years were from TAC mindsets. And so they didn't have the SAC mindset. It was a totally different leadership style. So things were changing, and it got to the point where the decision was made after the Cold War ended to terminate the alert force concept. No more B-52s on alert with nuclear weapons, no more airborne alert with nuclear weapons, no more airborne command and control, and we're going to dissolve Strategic Air Command. And some of the aircraft are going to the boneyard, and some are going to be assigned to two bases, Minot Air Force Base and Barksdale Air Force Base, which are the only two B-52 locations. And they're all going to be H models, B-52Hs, which are the latest version to come off the assembly line in the early 60s. They were the turbofan. And that was going to occur on 1 June 1992. That was the end of SAC. I was not going to be a SAC combat crew guy all my years in the Air Force and then have to retire as a Tactical Air Command guy. So I said, okay, I'm going to retire on the effective 1 June. Okay. At the flagpole at Castle. So I assembled there with my family, and we were all present. And they They had some troops lined up, so I had a troop complement there, and the commander was there and read my orders, said I was relieved from active duty effective 1 June 1992, and that was at close of business on Friday.
Lieutenant Colonel Alvin Osborn, Jr., effective 31 May 1992, you are relieved from duty, organization, and station of assignment, and retired in accordance with Air Force Regulation 35-7 in the grade of Lieutenant Colonel. This is to certify that Alvin Osborn, Jr., having served faithfully and honorably, has retired from the United States Air Force on the first day of June, 1992. Signed, Merle A. McPeak, Chief of Staff.
Unless somebody at Hickam in Hawaii, which was 2 hours later, would have retired, then they might have been the last SAC guy to retire. But I didn't think there was any SAC people at Hickam, so I've often wondered if that event I was, if not the last, maybe one of the last few SAC guys to retire in Strategic Air Command. I mean, ceremoniously retired at that point. So that was it. So as I look back on it, the military changed a lot during the time I was in service. For 26 years, 2 months, and 27 days, I never lost the feeling of it's a serious responsibility. I have to do my best. No funny business. I grew up with a checklist. I mean, there's a mission to get a bomb on a target, and there's a way to do it, foolproof way, and it follows a checklist, and you do that. You follow the checklist, and you get the job done. You don't deviate. No targets of opportunity. No fooling around. So the ribbon bar is a way to demonstrate the events that you've been in the Air Force, the accomplishments that you've made in the military. So probably the most significant is the first ribbon on the upper left, which is the blue and red ribbon, white ribbon, is a Distinguished Flying Cross, which I got for a mission in Southeast Asia. Then there is a Meritorious Service ribbon, which is on the top row. The next one, I think it's a maroon colored one. For service, Meritorious Service, which that was submitted by a commander with a citation to read for achievements. Then there's a blue and gold, kind of a blue and gold ribbon. I have 2 of those, and those are air medals. There's another ribbon on there that is a National Defense ribbon, which is given to military personnel for serving their nation. I have a Small Arms Marksmanship ribbon. There are 3 ribbons there that apply to service in Southeast Asia. There's a Vietnamese campaign and a Vietnamese service medal ribbon, and there's a Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry that was awarded to me. And then, of course, the aviation badge, which is most important. That's what I started out. That was my first award. My wings, the star and the wreath is a command pilot wings. So I go from a regular pilot, which is a slick wing that has nothing, to the top, which is a command pilot, has the star and the wreath. So pretty proud of that. When I walk around the B-52, and I get so much pleasure out of talking about the B-52 to people, because it was such an incredible weapons system. What I think about when I'm walking around looking at that was how much the airplane meant to my development and my perception of what freedom is all about. It was a vehicle in which 6 guys came together and put their lives in each other's hands and did a mission. And the price of failure was death, essentially. Sometimes the price of success was going to be death too. But it was a way in which I could help project my nation's resolve on the world stage. There's a lot of emotion involved in that, because I look at that and think, if by the grace of God, I'm here looking up and instead of not being here, like so many of my crew guys were. So it's an emotional ride, and it also points out that period, you have a period in your life where you can do something that's really meaningful, and you can experience things that are really meaningful and real and raw, and you have to be ready to take advantage of that. And then you have to understand that while that's going on, that's what it means. And now I'm at a point where I can look back on that and say, I understand all of that. And I think as a crew, as a family unit, we did pretty dang good at doing that. I'll tell you what I miss. It's being in an operational environment with people who are focused on the same thing. I didn't have to worry about whether or not my co-pilot was ready to go. I knew he was ready to go. I didn't have to worry about somebody saying, you know, I just don't want to do that today. I don't think we should do that. No complaining, no objections. Everyone was focused on a mission and a way to execute the mission. And I missed that because you can't experience that in the non-military world. I mean, people don't like to take orders. They resent taking orders from somebody. At least nowadays, it's getting to that point. So what I miss is the camaraderie. But I miss more than that now. I miss the relationships that I had with the crew and with the SAC system, that whole mindset. Being on a team, everybody's focused in the same direction. You know, there's no free agency in SAC crews. And then I think about my children and my grandchildren and being able to transmit my thoughts to them in that regard, and then they will be in a position to make their own life decisions and how they view themselves. The words like responsibility and credibility and integrity and all of those things, commitment, all very important. Then I think, well, gee, why am I thinking about this at this time of my life? And I guess it's time to start thinking about that. So thank you for doing this, because it finally gave me a chance to talk from my heart about what I felt and what the last 26 years plus meant to me in the military. So thanks.